I've often said those that cover the Tennessee Volunteers, sometimes they become absolute homers. Well, I know Caleb Calhoun of allfortennessee.com wants the Vols to win, but I also know he's not going to sacrifice any journalistic principles in doing so, and as such, he's one of the people that I respect most that cover the Tennessee Volunteers. Allfortennessee.com is his website. He runs it. He also writes the USA Today. Beverly Davenport, fired as the chancellor at Tennessee. Caleb Calhoun, I want to ask you this. To me, I was actually told by Donna Shalala once, who of course was the president of the University of Miami, that there was no difference between a chancellor and a president. It was just semantics, wherever you were, and all. And here I'm now learning that there's a chancellor at Tennessee, there's a president, could you explain any of the hierarchy there at Tennessee on how the university works? Because I got to tell you, I don't mean to sound like some barefoot hillbilly, but this is a little bit beyond me. How does this structure work?
Believe it or not, it's actually beyond me too a little bit.
Okay.
I've always wondered how there's a chancellor and a president. I mean, the president is above the chancellor, but at the same time, the president answers to the board. The president's the one who answers to the board of trustees. So looks like the president was owned by the board. It was pretty much works for the board, and this seems like a move done by the board because people forget this. I just wrote about this and posted it a little while ago. I'm going to refer to them from now on as failed businessmen before I start as their title. So failed businessman Bill Haslam, who is now the governor of Tennessee, was allowed about a month ago to sign into law a complete restructuring of the university board of trustees, and where he was allowed to reduce the number, get rid of everybody, and appoint his own people. That happened about a month ago. And then this happened today, or yesterday, with DPHO firing, or demoting Chancellor Davenport. And we know that Chancellor Davenport, to her credit, broke ranks from what the Haslams wanted back in December when she pushed out John Curry, who was supposed to be their puppet, and then hired Philip Fulmer as athletic director, who then hired Jeremy Pruitt. And anybody that doesn't think there's politics behind this is just being blind. I mean, they literally cited her communication skills twice as reasons for demoting her, and then they gave her a tenure position with the communications department.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about that. And the communications department also. Well, the question is, and I know you don't have, well, tell me if you do, but do you think that Davenport is going to teach any sort of communications class at UT Knoxville? I mean, a lot of people are skeptical of that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm skeptical of it too. I don't know if she'll be a teacher, if she'll teach, or if she'll just be with an administrative position. I mean, if I looked at the salary right, if I remember, it was over $400,000. I mean, I don't know much about college professor salaries, but that seems like a pretty good one for a college professor. So it's almost like, I could be wrong, but it's almost like, are they trying to buy her silence? So I don't know all the inner workings of that, but I know this much. I know she stood up to the failed businessmen that are Jimmy and Bill Haslam, who lose at everything they do. And she also, and I know that Bill Haslam has been trying to launch a hostile takeover of the university over the past month. And so at this point, the University of Tennessee is becoming Haslam University, and they actually used to be known for a good business school, but I'm like, if the Haslams are going to start running the school, I wouldn't send my kids to a business school run by the Haslams, because nobody failed worse at business than Bill and Jimmy Haslam.
Well, you say that, but I mean, I got to ask then, how does Bill become the governor? How does Jimmy run Pilot? Explain why you say these are failed businessmen. It sounds a lot to me like, let's say a left-wing, like the Young Turks saying that Donald Trump is a failed businessman. No, it does sound like that when you say the Haslams are failed businessmen. Why do you think they are?
Okay, so here I have evidence that we know historically that if you are born into a certain amount of wealth, it's impossible. So it's almost impossible to lose your positions of power and wealth, no matter how bad you are at business, because it's just too easy. And so Bill Haslam, as I wrote in my blog today, was the CEO of the e-commerce division of
Mm-hmm.
There is an SEC report for everybody in East Tennessee. I don't mean the Southeastern Conference. I mean Securities and Exchange Commission.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an SEC report in 2002 of the restructuring that division was forced to do because of how much money it was losing. And stock shares dropped from like $35 to $11 during that time. And then Bill Haslam left. He ended up running for mayor of Knoxville. Again, it probably wasn't that hard for a Haslam to rise in a political career in East Tennessee. I mean, I don't know if you know much about West Tennessee, but it's the same with the Ford family in West Tennessee. It's pretty easy.
No, I'm familiar with the Harold Fords. Yeah, I know what you're speaking of. Yes.
Yeah. So it's pretty easy for any Haslam, no matter how much they fail in business, to rise in East Tennessee. So we already had a name recognition. He already had the infrastructure. That's Bill Haslam. Jimmy Haslam, pilot-based flying was specifically created by Big Jim Haslam. By the way, who is a good businessman? Was specifically created so Jimmy Haslam could run a company. He got it from his daddy. And let's not forget that 5 years ago, that company was $4 billion in debt. It's right now, right coming off the midst of a horrific rebate scam, which I don't think anybody believes that Jimmy Haslam didn't know about it. And again, this is oil we're talking here. Do you know how bad of a businessman you have to be to run oil into debt when you inherited the company? And so that's why I say they're both failed businessmen. Now, Jimmy Haslam's lucky. Warren Buffett bought a huge shares of Pilot because, again, the product itself is valuable, and it doesn't take a really savvy businessman to run that product, particularly when they didn't create it. So Warren Buffett bought a bunch of shares, which kind of saved the company to a certain degree, but they still have this rebate for all scheme. And, by the way, Saks Fifth Avenue in 2007 had to settle for its own fraud scheme to try to inflate its own prices, which went back 7 years, which dated back to when Bill Haslam was with Saks Fifth Avenue, and the CEO overseeing that fraud scheme at Saks became the director of Pilot when Pilot had its rebate scam in 2013.
Well, Caleb Calhoun of allfortennessee.com, I could show you some vacant stores that very recently, just a few years ago, were Saks Fifth Avenues. So say no more. And that really was a nice, ritzy, department store. Maybe I always had the feeling of Saks Fifth Avenue as being America's ritziest department store, and now I see, nothing in so many of the locations they had. So say no more about why you say the Haslams are failed business people, and it's not like the Browns are doing real well either. We know about that as well. But it kind of the power structure, and I know this is talked about. I know that some people felt that Davenport had stood up to the Haslams. I guess what I have done is I've always felt that East Tennessee in general, and certainly University of Tennessee here, insular. And what you're saying is that, and I kind of sense this myself, see if you agree with this, that here's Beverly Davenport, comes from Cincinnati. If you read the letter from Joe DiPietro, it is, you don't communicate, and it basically says, you don't play ball very well. And that to me says more of, hey, we don't like you because you're an outsider. Is that what you kind of felt as well when you were reading that letter, Caleb Calhoun of allfortennessee.com?
That's exactly what I read. I read, you don't play ball well. And here's the thing. Chancellor Davenport did play ball when she came on. Remember, she did willingly hire John Curry after there was a heavy push from the boosters of the board for John Curry to be athletic director. She did play ball. I think immediately she realized that if you play ball with the people running the university at Tennessee, then you're going to run the school into the ground because they all have their own political agenda. So that's when she decided, I'm going to do she said, I'm going to do what I personally think is right for the university. Now, we can go back and forth on whether or not Fulmer is AD is long-term right for the university. I think actually Dave Blackburn was always the better choice, but I think Fulmer at the very least united the fan base. And to Chancellor Davenport's credit, she was listening to the public more than she was listening to the boosters at that point. And so I think that was very clear at that point. You're not playing ball with the people in power here. It's almost like if a politician, it's almost like if you could see a public letter written to a politician from a donor. You know what I mean? Like, because
let me ask this. Can Phil Fulmer then survive? Because I know that everybody says, oh, he's Tennessee to the bone and certainly a popular figure, unless I guess you're a diehard John Majors guy or something. Maybe he's not then. But what you're telling me, in your opinion, Caleb Calhoun, is that the Haslams are running the show. They're going to select their own president after DePietro retires in a few months. They're going to select their own chancellor, and then it's you're going to work with us one way or the other. And by golly, you're going to listen. If we want to outsource those jobs at Tennessee, we're going to outsource them. If we want to bring in Greg Schiano, we're going to bring him in. That's the vision that I'm getting from you, Caleb Calhoun. So if that's true, can Fulmer survive?
I think Fulmer can, and this is not a testament to Fulmer, by the way, what I'm about to say. I wrote about this in my blog. I think Fulmer can, because Fulmer showed back in '92 with the whole Johnny Major saga that even if he's against it personally, he's willing to play ball with the boosters and with the top donors of the university for the sake of his career. And so even though I know that Fulmer and the House had some tension because Big Jim back in 2008, Fulmer, according to Clay Travis, Fulmer had said that Big Jim could have stopped his firing and didn't. But at the same time, I think Fulmer is savvy enough to know that he's going to have to play ball with the Haslams, and I think he's willing to do it. I felt that Fulmer, and not just Fulmer, but Jeremy Pruitt, I felt both of them should have had a moral responsibility to speak out against what happened to Chancellor Davenport, because neither one of them would be in their positions right now if it wasn't for Chancellor Davenport. And I know they have their own jobs to worry about, but I just felt that, Chancellor Davenport, by listening to the public, is the reason that Fulmer is athletic director, and which is also by association the reason that Jeremy Pruitt is still a head coach right now and not still a defensive coordinator at Alabama.
Well, let me ask you about that. Let's go back a little in time. Let's say I'm Beverly Davenport, and we can talk about 6 hours of not being in communication with Curry and all this. I'll be honest, when I hear that, I am reminded a little bit of the 7 minutes of George W. Bush reading the children's story at the kindergarten instead of just snap toing and saying I've got to go at 9/11. I got to tell you, I see a similarity there. That's my opinion. I don't know how big of a deal it was to me, but let me just say this. I am Davenport, and I say, well, you know what, Curry? It was unorthodox, but if you can bring in Mike Leach, all is forgiven. And so let's say right now, Curry was the AD, Leach is the football coach. Do you think that Davenport is still the chancellor?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I think Davenport is still the chancellor at this point. Now, how long that lasts, I don't know, because I know this much about Mike Leach. Mike Leach is not one to necessarily play ball with power structures at schools either. But
maybe that's why he's not here. Although I have said, I am not sure that I wouldn't rather have Curry, Leach, Davenport, if you want to go there, than Fulmer, Pruitt. Not that Fulmer and Pruitt aren't great names, but here's the deal, Caleb Calhoun of allfortennessee.com. Phil Fulmer as an AD, he's untested. And, it is not the contemporary way to hire athletic directors to hire the old coach. I know Bobby Valentine is an AD now. I know Barry Alvarez is, but show me another former coach, or in the case of Valentine, manager that is running an athletic department. Outside of Fulmer, there just aren't any. And Jeremy Pruitt, you can say, defensive coordinator from Alabama. Hey, can't beat him, join him. How could you do worse than how could you do better, than an assistant from the national champion? Obviously, I get that. Okay. However, Mike Leach, extraordinarily charismatic, would have been the biggest name, could take headlines away from Nick Saban, and nobody else in the SEC could do that. So you're following what I'm saying here. You would have Coach Charisma versus Pruitt, who is Coach Dull. Let's face that fact. And so I'm not sure I wouldn't rather have Curry and Leach if that was on the table. That's the whole thing here. And now what I see is, instead of having that, the Haslams, as you're saying, in control, and who knows what happens, and just, the future of the athletic program being there from hopefully that Phil Fulmer can succeed because of his popularity. Do you have anything? I'm sorry that's my take. I want to get that out. It's my show. But Caleb Calhoun, do you have anything else to add to that? Or do you think I'm wrong?
No, actually, I kind of agree with you. I thought about it with the Pruitt hire. And this is kind of what we talked about before with, like, the state of Tennessee athletics. Because don't get me wrong. I mean, you and I have disagreements over how great Tennessee can be. But what I will say is that Tennessee can't be great doing what Alabama does.
Mm-hmm.
Because Tennessee is not going to be able to just have the simplified offense and elite talent on defense to just dominate everybody, because they're not going to be able to get those recruits. They actually have a better chance of winning by still recruiting very, very well, but having a coach with a brilliant, creative offensive mind that could move ahead, that could be ahead of Nick Saban in that regard. You know what I mean? And I think that in that way, Mike Leach would have been better. I will say in Jeremy Pruitt's favor that, to his credit on that, he did bring a creative offensive mind in as offensive coordinator in Tyson Helton, which could alleviate some of that, because Tyson Helton is a protege of Jeff Brom, which is part of the Bobby Petrino system, and we know how well the Bobby Petrino offensive system works at Arkansas.
Yeah.
So there is the creativity on offense that was there. But you're right, the Mike Leach charisma would have been huge.
Well, I just say that I do think that Tennessee could restore themselves to, let's say, their 1990s heyday. I just think that the NCAA would have to allow paying the players for that to happen. Because if you're the second most profitable franchise, then yeah, I mean, who's going to beat you there? Doesn't matter that Knoxville isn't exactly Miami when it comes to producing ball players. I mean, so that's my thing there. Under the current system, yes, I do think that the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Floridas and a lot of other schools have some advantages over Tennessee, despite the popularity within their fan base and such. Anyway, Caleb Calhoun, I mean, what you're giving us here is, not the greatest picture for the future of UT athletics. But the last question I guess I want to say is that I just said, if it was right now Curry and Leach, and it was, this was unorthodox, but look who we're bringing in right now, that Davenport would still be the chancellor. How disturbing is that at an academic institution, the football program could control who the chancellor is?
Well, I mean, I used to think that was disturbing, but again, the football program does bring in a ton of revenue.
Yeah.
Universities, and I mean, I said this with, I go to school. When I went to school in Maryland. Funny enough, the football program got blamed for not generating enough revenue to subsidize other programs, so those programs had to shut down. But I'm like, yeah, you guys are blaming the football program for not generating enough money to subsidize other programs. Think about what we're saying here. You know what I mean?
But weren't let me say, Maryland was very unique, because didn't Maryland have like a tremendous amount of programs? I mean, I think they had 29 programs at one time. I could be off a little bit, but they had a lot. They did. They had a lot of programs and a lot of expenses too. Yeah, I think that one time the baseball program at Maryland only had 3 scholarships they could give out. That's how spread out they were. So one could say, I mean, how popular would Maryland football have to have been to be able to subsidize 29 other sports and, 13 scholarships for baseball or whatever? I mean, that's, and I want to just reiterate, I might be wrong a little bit, but I remember doing a story years ago at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on a former Maryland baseball player, and he said, he only had 3 scholarships. Now, that's the word of the catcher, but still,
yeah. And this is why I say the Big Ten move was so good for Maryland, funny enough, a school like that, because the baseball program does now actually, the baseball program is doing better than it ever has done in school history out at Maryland. So, yeah, it is kind of an interesting take. But, yeah, it's one of those where, like, I agree with you about Chancellor Davenport with the in the football program. I think it was indirectly the football program, though, because it was more about, she's not willing to play ball and buddy up and do whatever the Haslam say, so we need to let her go.
Well, Yeah, let me just say, so anyway, we'll be following this on Tri-City Sports Now, and certainly they will on allfortennessee.com with Caleb Calhoun. But I wanted to take you on, there was something that you wrote, and I love the article, by the way. You wrote the top 10 players signed as NFL free agents and the likelihood that they would have on making their various their various pro football teams. And one of the guys that you mentioned, you said you thought the most likely player to land who signed as a free agent was Trevor Daniel. And I know that Shane Leckler with the Texans has a 1-year contract and he's 41 years old, but he led the NFL in punting average last year, 49 yards a boot. How's Trevor Daniel gonna beat out the top punter in the league?
I think that Shane Leckler is going to be eyeing retirement in a couple of years, and Trevor Daniel will be ready to go immediately when that happens. I think that of all the mistakes Butch Jones made, finding Trevor Daniel was probably his biggest asset. We forget this. During that time, in 2015, Tennessee had a fifth-year transfer punter, Nate Renfro, who I watched at Maryland and was very reliable, and they had an All-American freshman in Johnny Townsend. Trevor Daniel ran them both off as a walk-on, and I think Leckler probably, again, he signed a 1-year deal. I'm just going by the likelihood. And remember this, let's be fair here. There's a chance that all 10 of these guys could flop. So I'm just saying the most likely to have a chance of success, because all of them have things working against them. Evan Berry, too, kind of number 2, but he's with the Cleveland Browns. And just being with the Cleveland Browns could make you a failure in the NFL.
And I read through that. I don't agree. I mean, when I was going through, and I one of the reasons I loved your article there, Caleb, was that I did the same thing on this show. I said, okay, let's break down where these free agents, what their likelihood is. Well, Kendall Vickers, that's going to be tough adding to the top pass rush in the NFL. But you know what? He's the only defensive end that they've brought in with the Steelers this year. So if somebody goes down, that might be a spot and all this. The last thing, and then I do have to go, Colton Jumper. And I've always loved Jumper because it's such an underdog. I've talked about him. The big game that he had against Florida, I know he started short. But you mentioned this. You said you didn't think that necessarily he was going to fit in with the schemes that the Saints did. But what I said was that the Saints allowed 4.4 yards a carry a rush last year. So, yeah, bringing in a linebacker who did stuff the run 2 years ago against Ohio, who did do that against Florida 2 years ago. I think it's a positive for him to make the team, but you had both sides on there. Colton Jumper making the Saints. Pros and cons. Could you elaborate?
Yes. Okay. So the pros is, again, I mean, there is a chance that you can get a look. I mean, mainly because the Saints, Colton Jumper's not as physical of a linebacker, and the Saints focus a little more on the physicality on their quarterbacks and defensive backs than other defensive schemes do. So that's an advantage for Colton Jumper. But he also, I said that Colton Jumper was good against two types of offenses. Undermanned spread offenses, in which they didn't have the horses, i.e. Ohio, or extremely simplified pro-style offenses. Neither of those offenses exist in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And Florida ran an extremely simplified pro-style offense. We all know, I mean, we joke about this, but as bad as the reason Butch Joseph lost to Florida looks so bad is because he lost to Jim McElwain, who is incompetent himself.
Yeah.
His coaching offense.
Yeah.
So
why are all those seconds ticking off before Franks threw the touchdown? Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those where Colton Jumper went up against a simplified pro style, by the way, that was run with a backup quarterback in Austin Appleby, who was not good, or an undermanned spread offense in Ohio, which was, again, they ran a spread, but they're a smaller team, so he was able to get off blocks more easily. But when you saw him against bigger teams, he just wasn't able to do the same thing.
Well, I like Appleby a little bit more than you do, but it's a point well taken, and it's a website that must be read if you're a Tennessee fan. Allfortennessee.com, Caleb Calhoun breaking it down, Beverly Davenport's firing, and now who's going to make it as a free agent from the Vols in the NFL. Final segment of Tri-City Sports now coming up after this. All right.